So, increased uncertainty is contractionary to the economy for structural reasons, whatever your theory about monetary influences might be. We don't have to bring in money into the picture. The fourth structural force I want to mention is that the slower pace of productivity growth in the past couple of years will presumably, as that goes on, will presumably lower further business people's expectations of productivity growth over the medium-term future. And that spells a lowering of the shadow prices that businesses place on having another unit of the business asset at a certain time, just having another customer, having another employee. And that's going to be contraction. I think in my text I have a what I thought was a pretty good discussion of the oil price and whether an increase in the real price of imported oil owing to some shock overseas, whether that's contractionary in any structural way for our economy, in the United States. But the more I think about that subject, the more I realize that my thinking about it has been a bit too narrow. I should have been more aware other possible assumptions that have been made. I was thinking always that oil is used to produce the consumer good, while labor is used to produce the capital good. And that led me to argue that it could be that when the price of oil goes up, that has two effects. It reduces the earnings on capital goods in the consumer goods sector, and that causes immediate downward reappraisal of the value of having another unit of business assets, which should be a drag, or that would be a drag on, that would drag down investment activity and reduce employment. But on the other hand, I argued, with capital and labor in the consumer goods sector having less oil to work with, so the machines turn over more slowly, figuratively speaking, not getting enough oil. The marginal productivity of labor would be reduced. And that would mean that for the capital goods sector, it's now cheaper than before to add new business assets. This is mostly labor that is used to build offices. It's mostly labor that's used to train workers to become new employees. So it's labor whose opportunity cost really matters a lot. So having all these things in mind, I've usually argued that I don't know whether an increase in the real price of oil is contractionary or not. Could be contractionary, could be expansionary. Depends on that tug of war between the two forces. And I remember that James Tobin used to say that he thought that the investment on the whole was stimulated by the 1970s oil shock. But he had something very particular in mind. He had in mind the idea that suddenly businesses had to find new energy-saving methods of production, so they had to invest in new methods of production. But now I realize that, at least in empirical terms, I'm in the state. because we should have realized that oil is also used to produce capital goods. In fact, a lot of construction capital is extremely energy intensive. That could have, if that was the only way in which oil was used, then the rise in the price of oil would would increase the costs of producing investment goods, and on top of reducing possibly the value of having more capital goods. So oil shocks would be actually quite reactionary. Stepping back from all this, it seems to me that the U.S. economy and several Western European economies were saved from a rather dreary decade by their housing booms. One might imagine that the housing boom came at the expense of the internet and mobile communications boom, so that there was no positive effect on aggregate employment resulting from the housing boom. It was just a matter of moving employment away from business investment into residential investment. But that's not really the way things work. The American economy didn't need to give up its ICT investment in the present decade in order to make room for additional investment in housing. Thanks to the openness, thanks to the global economy and the openness of the American economy, it was possible to borrow enough to have both booms simultaneously, to have a continuation of the information and communications technology boom, while simultaneously having a newfound housing boom at the same time. Now we don't have either boom, it looks like. And so it looks like we don't have a very bright, looks like the foreseeable future is going to be one of just a normal level of activity at best, and in the worst case, something a good deal less than normal level of activity. Of course, there are some structural forces working the other way. Export demand is still increasing, not just in the United States, but also in Europe. Export demand is increasing faster than productivity. So that's a real plus. And also the information and communications boom is surely not completely over. Judging by the considerable venture capital activity in Silicon Valley, much of it is still directed toward information and communications technology. You know, the boom created by electricity went on forever, decade after decade, before it was all over. So there's historical precedent, some optimism. However, my sense is that the four contractionary forces are winning the tug of war with the two expansionary forces I just mentioned. The data on magnitudes show that the decline of total investment demand, business plus residential, has been a great deal stronger over the past 12 months, say, than the rise of export demand. And that impression is reinforced by the observation that the dollar has weakened in the past year. It didn't strengthen thanks to exports, thanks to booming exports.